Okay, picture this. A crime is committed, but in total secret. No witnesses, no cameras, nothing. So how does a court possibly solve a puzzle like that? Well, today, we're unlocking the toolbox the entire justice system uses to find the truth, even when it's been deliberately buried. No, really. Think about it for a second. The door's locked, the curtains are drawn. How can anyone possibly know what really went down? It seems impossible, right? But believe it or not, it isn't. The legal system has a really specific and pretty powerful set of tools designed for this exact problem. The answer, it turns out, is something called the law of evidence. You can think of it as the official rulebook for what a court is even allowed to listen to. And to help us get a handle on these tools of truth, we're going to be looking at some concepts from India's new evidence code, the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam. We'll just call it the BSA. So, first things first, what is evidence? According to the law, it's actually surprisingly simple. It's basically two things: everything a witness says out loud, that's your oral evidence, and every document or electronic record shown to the court. That's documentary evidence. Just think of these as the raw materials, the building blocks, a court uses to reconstruct what happened in the past. Now, this evidence kind of comes in two main flavors. You have direct evidence, which is the smoking gun, A witness gets on the stand and says, "I saw it happen." Clear cut. But what about when there are no witnesses? Well, that's where circumstantial evidence becomes the hero of the story. It isn't just one single thing. It's more like a chain of smaller facts that, when you link them all together, they point to only one logical conclusion. That is how we solve the puzzle. So how does a prosecutor actually use this stuff? I mean, put yourself in the shoes of a detective for a moment. With no eyewitnesses, you can't just point your finger and say they did it. You have to become a storyteller, piecing together a whole narrative from the little clues left behind. And in the courtroom, prosecutors build this story using three absolutely crucial links in that chain of circumstantial evidence. They're looking for the why, the how, and the reaction. And when you put those three together, they can tell a story that's often way more compelling than a single person's memory. First up is motive, the why. What's the deep down reason for the crime? Take a look at this classic case. A man is drowning in debt, and he poisons a friend who could expose his financial ruin. All of a sudden, his desperation becomes this incredibly powerful motive, a key piece of the puzzle that links him directly to the crime, even if nobody saw him do it. The next link in our chain is preparation, the how. Did the person actually set things up? Did they get the tools for the crime? This part shows intent. So for instance, if someone is accused of poisoning, the fact that they bought that exact poison just the day before, well, that's a huge piece of evidence. It's another really strong link in the chain. And the final link is conduct, basically how someone reacts after the crime. Did they run away? Did they try to destroy evidence? Or get this, in one incredible case, a victim couldn't speak because her throat had been cut, but she used hand gestures to identify her attacker right before she died. Her conduct, her final actions, became powerful, undeniable evidence. But it's not just about what people do. Sometimes the most powerful evidence of all is what people say. Words that are spoken in the heat of the moment, or even in the face of death, can literally become voices from the event that speak directly to the court. As a general rule, the law really distrusts secondhand information, or what lawyers call hearsay. So if a witness says, "My friend told me he saw something," that's usually not allowed in court. It's just not reliable. But what happens when the words are so tangled up with the action that they become part of the event itself? Well, that's when the law makes some pretty dramatic exceptions. Okay, the first big exception has a fancy Latin name, rest geste, which really just means things done. The idea behind it is simple. If someone says something so spontaneously during an event, they literally don't have time to think up a lie. And it's that pure, unfiltered spontaneity that makes it trustworthy. For example, check out this real case. A woman made a hysterical phone call to an operator, just pleading, "Get me the police, please." Just moments later, she was shot and killed. The court allowed her words to be used as evidence. Why? Because the sheer panic in her voice was a spontaneous reaction to an immediate threat. It wasn't some calculated statement, it was part of the crime as it was happening. And this example from Indian law is just as powerful. As a woman was being murdered, her kids were heard screaming, "Save my mother." Their cries weren't a description of what happened later on. They were happening during the crime. The law sees it as part of the same transaction, and that makes it admissible evidence. The second major exception is something called a dying declaration. The thinking here is rooted deep in human nature. There's an old saying, a man will not meet his maker with a lie in his mouth. Basically, the law assumes that a person who knows they're about to die has a very powerful incentive to tell the truth about who put them there. All right, so we've moved from the victim's words to the suspects. Now we're in the interrogation room. A confession? That seems like the ultimate piece of evidence, right? An open and shut case. But you might be surprised. The law is extremely careful about when a suspect's own words can be used against them. And here is the crucial point. The law deeply, and I mean deeply, distrusts confessions made to the police. If a confession is the result of a threat, or it's made directly to a police officer or while in their custody, it almost always gets thrown out. The whole system is designed to prevent coercion. A confession is usually only accepted if it's made voluntarily in front of a neutral party, like a judge, or, and this is the really interesting part, if it leads to the discovery of something new. This is that fascinating discovery exception. Just look at this statement. A suspect tells the police, I killed B with a knife and I hid the knife in my backyard. Now the police go and they find the knife. Here's what the court does. It will not allow the first part, I killed B, as evidence. That's a confession to the police, so it's out. But it will allow the second part, because that specific piece of information led to the discovery of a new fact, the murder weapon itself. Okay, so all the evidence is on the table. The motive, the conduct, those spontaneous words, maybe the admissible parts of a confession. Now what? How does a judge actually weigh all of this to come to a verdict? Well, they use a set of logical tools called presumptions. You can think of presumptions as legal shortcuts that are based on common sense and experience. They come in 3 different strengths. The weakest is may presume, where a judge has a choice. A little stronger is shall presume, which is basically a direct order. And the most powerful of all is conclusive proof, where the law just says the debate is officially over. So let's start with may presume. This is a discretionary tool. The classic example is this. You find someone holding stolen goods right after a theft. Logic suggests they're probably the thief, or at least they knew the goods were stolen. A court may draw that conclusion, but it doesn't have to, especially if the person has a really good explanation. Okay, now shall presume is a lot stronger. Here the court has no choice. It must accept a fact as proven unless the other side can come up with evidence to disprove it. The example here is a very serious one from Indian law, designed to fight social evils. In certain tragic cases of a young wife's suicide, the law literally commands the court to presume the husband is responsible. The burden of proof then shifts entirely to him to prove he's innocent. And finally, we get to conclusive proof. This is the law's final absolute word. Once a certain fact is proven, another fact is automatically established, and nobody is allowed to argue against it. The best example is the legitimacy of a child born during a marriage. For the sake of social order and stability, the law just declares this to be conclusive proof of paternity. It closes the door on any further debate. And that brings us to our final thought for today. We've seen how the legal system uses this really complex web of rules about circumstances and spontaneous words and these powerful presumptions, all to build a case. But this whole framework, it's about what can be proven in court according to a very specific set of rules. And that's not always the same thing as what is absolutely 100% true. So the question we're left with is this. What does that gap, that space between proof and truth, really mean for our idea of justice?